We had to walk uphill in the snow both ways.
In high heels in Helsinki.
I did. What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm Jessica Neal, and unfortunately, Patty isn't here today. She's dealing with some personal stuff, but I'm in the presence of an amazing woman that I met in Helsinki at a conference. Her name is Lindsay Kaplan, and Lindsay helped me when I was in desperate need because I had the worst shoes on for Helsinki. I had on high heels and I was slipping all over the place. And she helped me get to the next venue safely without cracking my skull on the sidewalk.
I think there was a group of us. You had a girl gang around you. You were teetering in the snow in the worst shoes I have ever seen in Finland. Beautiful pumps. And you had a gang of women hoisting you up.
I know, I did. Which, I think says something about what we're going to talk about. And just to introduce Lindsay, you are the co-founder of Chief, which is a women's professional network, which has grown to over 20,000 women in the network. And this is, mostly women executives. And I think you all were recently named one of Time's 100 most influential companies. You yourself the list is very long, but I'm going to read it off here. Most dynamic female founders for INC, Webby Award, Crane's 40 Under 40, Ad Age Leading Women, WICMA Marketing Leader of the Year, New York Business Journal Women of Influence. I mean, the list goes on, Lindsay. It's super impressive. And prior to co-founding this network and company, you were an executive yourself at Casper. So I'm excited to talk to you because there's so many things I want to know just from not only your personal experience, but your experience as a co-founder of this network. So first, tell us a little bit about Chief, why you founded it, how that started, and how it's going.
Sure. Well, Jessica, loved meeting you in Helsinki, loved hoisting you up, and I'm so happy to be here. And I'm sorry Patty couldn't make it. Boy, did you describe me in such detail. I feel like that's not me. That's a list of accolades. As you mentioned prior to starting Chief, I was VP at Casper. And I am using big air quotes of VP because I was the first employee at Casper. There were 5 incredible founders. They let me have the title of VP. Let me tell you, when there are 6 people in a room, you are not VP. Or you're VP, but you're also assistant, you're also coordinator, you're also the janitor. Loved my time at Casper. I'm a brand person. I love stories and creativity. I love sparks of excitement. So I had a wonderful time helping to grow that brand. And by the time I left Casper, I was there for 4 years. I had a 20-person team. I had a big sizable budget. I was really figuring out what it means to be an executive, what it means to be a leader. And when you're a woman executive, you have to be just as great of an executive as you have to be no matter who you are. But there is the added pressure of feeling like you are speaking for the women in the room, knowing that there are a lot of people who want your mentorship, who say, hey, can we grab a few minutes? Can we get that coffee? Can we do lunch? Feeling like you're put a bit on a pedestal in, women in business conferences. And so as I was thinking about how I could progress as a leader in my career, knowing there was that kind of added weight, stress, pressure on me, my co-founder and I started talking about, I wish there was a network of other women who got it. And it's not that professional networks and executive networks didn't exist. They do. They are wonderful. And it's not that there aren't amazing organizations for women, but there's a knowledge that you share with other women who are facing that pressure, who feel like they have the world on their shoulders, and the camaraderie you build. And I think, Jessica, it's why you and I had such a great meeting in Helsinki, because sometimes you meet people and you just feel like, you get it. You get it. You get it. I don't have to explain it. And so that really was the spark to create Chief, which was that hybrid of both an executive network for women who could maximize their leadership impact, but also find community, find camaraderie in a confidential arena with other people who got it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're sort of describing how I always felt as a woman executive. And we just had a woman that I worked with at Netflix for a long time. She was our CMO. Her name's Bose. And she and I were talking about how lonely it is and how, together we felt more powerful in the room. And then it's the loneliness, but then it's the pressure you mentioned, is because it's sort of you're representing these women in the world and in your company, and you have this privilege to be in this room, and yet having that pressure to show up, to be great, to be on, and to drive a path forward, it can be overwhelming, right? And I had women, internally, or mentors, from past that I had worked with. It would sort of help a little bit, but that loneliness was sort of always there. So I'm so glad that you created something, because not to say that men don't experience these things and don't have loneliness themselves, they absolutely do. But I do think the path for women and women leaders can be a little bit more daunting and challenging, and not, there's not as many of us. It's just a fact.
It's just a fact. It's hard to be an only in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of people say, oh, when I was coming up in my career, there was that one woman and she was bitchy to me. She didn't mentor me. And we forget, if we see that there's one seat at the table, imagine the competitive rivalry you would feel thinking that there's only one seat for you. And so...
yeah, why would you want to...
right.
You're protecting your seat.
Exactly. So I think for decades, we created, or I would say, the corporate environment, which was largely run by white men, not purposefully, but what created was a spirit of cutthroat competition. And we recognize now, for us to build something that creates more seats at the table, that expands the table, it is not just about one woman getting to the top and, using those sharp elbows. It is about all of us sending the ladder down and collectively learning from one another and becoming stronger leaders together, so that we can build that table, we can bring more chairs in, and we can behave in a way that I think paves the way for others.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was so often, I don't know, in the times of me growing up as a executive, it was almost like you had to be part of the boys club, right? Like, That's how you got along. That's how you got ahead. And it wasn't that I tried to, deny the fact that I was a woman, but I definitely tried to fit in and camouflage a little bit with like their conversations and the things that they were interested in and the things that
How
they
many
found
sports
funny.
analogies can you make? Because I can make a lot of sports analogies, and I don't watch any sports.
Exactly. But tell me a little bit about like what you have learned that has changed for women in the workplace, and really, what do you think hasn't, and why?
I think the conversation has changed. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot more awareness. There is a lot more open dialogue around women being caregivers, around parental leave. There is an admission that we need to do better, and that women need to be in the boardroom, that people with intersectional identities need to be in all of the places that we see power. So the conversation has changed, and I think it's become less of an exception and more of a norm. What we haven't seen is all of that fully come to fruition. So we know that there's a huge delta of men and women who are in these board seats. We know that there are just far less women CFOs, COOs, CEOs, and that they're often coming up through, I came up through brand and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You've come up through HR, right? Those are more traditionally, I'm using air quotes again, but those are jobs that you're seeing more women in. And so there are a lot of conversations about parental leave, and yet companies are, still very far behind other developed countries in the world. And because our country does not offer a parental leave program, our companies have to fill that gap. And it's really difficult to ask companies who are competing with one another to be progressive, because those policies can impact the bottom line short term. So I think as much as the dialogue has shifted and it is something that is out in the open that people want and are talking about, actions speak louder than words. And we are seeing, especially in an economy like this, a lot of companies go back on some of their promises, go back on some of their commitments, and revert to old ways of working.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. The U.S. has such a different perspective when you travel the world, and women are having babies all over the place. The rest of the world handles it very differently than the U.S. and the responsibility is on the corporation. And look, like at Netflix, we got progressive about it, but I also don't think that helped solve the problem. Patty and I want to do like a whole episode on maternity leave. Not that parental leave isn't important, but just because women, when you do take leave, you often get left behind, right? And I remember saying to my husband after we got married, and I was a VP at Netflix, and I was like, no, I can't have a baby. Not right now. Like, not if I want to keep getting promoted, and like, I can't. If I have a baby, it won't happen.
Right. Even with a great policy in place, you still know that you are taking yourself out of this competitive dynamic. You are missing out. Yeah. It's something that women are penalized for, whether they have a child or not. We believe, as we are hiring, that a woman of childbearing age is more likely to get pregnant. And so unconsciously, we still have a bias towards men. Even when there is equal parental leave, there's still that bias that a woman of childbearing age is just less reliable, whether she is married with children or not.
Right. The thing that I've been thinking of is like, I don't have a solution for it. Like even when I went, had my baby later in life, but even when I went out on leave, I didn't fully go out, and I had a baby in the NICU and was back in 3 months, and it was so challenging. And even though I was not completely out and maybe more connected than some, still things changed, and I changed, right? And some of my priorities changed. And, my whole priority used to be my job, and now it's also this little human. So it's something that I'm passionate about, but it's also something I don't know if I necessarily have the right answer for.
But I think you nailed it. There is no answer. And it's one of the reasons why Chief has to exist. Because at the end of the day, there probably isn't a perfect solution to a lot of these problems. And therefore, we need a place for women who are shouldering that burden. Biologically, they are shouldering that burden to come together, to make sure that there is a place where they can talk through their experiences. And also, what's so great about Chief is, as leaders are coming together, how are they then going back into their companies with what they've learned about what works and what doesn't work with paid parental leave, with onboarding programs? So I think both having that place for the community to talk through their learned experiences, but then again, like learn as leaders and as executives, because very often they're responsible for going back into their organization with a smart take. It's that extra burden we give them. Hey, you're a woman. What should we do with parental leave? Right?
Figure it out for us. Thanks. So you sort of mentioned, women executives, like the landscape is changing. However, there's still sort of less women in the CEO role, CFO role. A lot of women executives come up like you and I through marketing, HR, other ways. How about the network? What's the makeup of the network in terms of the executives that you have? Like, do you have a lot of women CEOs? Do you have women CFOs?
We do. And I love, there is a name for the phenomenon you mentioned. So it's called the glass elevator.
Oh.
And it is the concept that women often get trapped vertically going up. So if you started marketing, you have one path up and you can be CMO and that is it.
That's so
And
true.
the research shows that men have an easier time horizontally moving from CFO to COO into marketing and taking different roles based off of opportunity. So they have more ways of approaching that chief executive role than women do. So I find that phenomenon fascinating. And I just love that phrase, glass elevator.
I had not heard that, and I love that too. But it's true.
It's true. And so again, there are a lot of amazing organizations out there. There are great organizations for women in marketing, for women in HR. My co-founder and I thought it was really important to make sure that women executives were coming together because yes, I have marketing problems, but I have problems that are just dealing with people, with the board, with my fellow executives, with internal communication, with budgeting. Like these are universal executive challenges that we are all grappling with and that we all have advice and wisdom to share based off of our experience. So that is the commonality at Chief is that we are women executives. We do vet. So we have criteria on our website. We're really clear about how we define what an executive is based off of both years of experience as well as reporting structure into the CEO. But we found that we've grown a really diverse organization that has people from different roles, different sectors, different functions, because that cognitive diversity is really strengthening. Mm-hmm. It is great when I am in the room with somebody who is a CFO who can give me their perspective about how a meeting went down with my board, because that is the advice and wisdom I need. As you go through your career and you get to that executive level, it really becomes who you know and hearing that wisdom and advice from others, because I functionally know what to do as a CMO. Like I'm good. I'm always going to have some marketing problems, but so helpful to get that perspective and get all of those different voices to really build myself an advisory board of others who have reached their executive levels through a completely different set of experiences.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I would say that you have gotten a little bit of slack for focusing on women executives and that you should broaden the network to more women. But personally, I don't understand the slack you're getting because women executives need a network and men have had all types of groups for hundreds and hundreds of years, supporting them in many ways. And yes, just like you were saying, you can go get some functional groups with other women. There's other women groups that are quite nice, but there's none that have really focused on women executives just quite like you are. But there's plenty of men networks that do. And so talk to me a little bit about how you feel about that, if you feel like that's fair, not fair.
I understand it because nobody wants to feel left out. So I understand that feedback. We created Chief for executives because once the room opens and once levels, and again, once you just say like all women can join this, the executives become the de facto mentors. And so what we've strived to do with Chief is give them a space where they can be vulnerable and they can be really open about their challenges and to take the mentorship burden off of their plate. And so that is why we created Chief, was to say, you know, I had so many women who were asking me for coffees, for mentorship, for advice. Whether my advice was good or bad is a whole other story. But where do the mentors go for mentorship? Where do our women leaders go to confide in one another? And it's hard to do that if you are put in the role of advice giver and not advice getter. So it is why we created Chief. It was never our intention to leave anybody out. And we knew when we started Chief, just looking at the dynamics of the boardroom, that, you know, there are far more white women in positions within the C-suite and VP roles than women of color. And so before we launched, we actually set a goal to double our representation of women of color within our organization. We do that through a grant program. I think to date, we've given away over $8 million in grants over the last few years. We do that by outbounding and making sure that it's not just word of mouth, because it's really important for us to make sure that women who may not have heard of Chief are aware, and that we've, seen if they want to join. And then internally, we have groups that are focused on identity and inclusion, because I know that my experience as a white woman is different than the lived experience of somebody with an intersectional background. And if you and I have felt othered, let me tell you, I guarantee other people have felt that impacted and magnified based off of who they are and how they're showing up and their identity. So it's been part of the DNA of Chief, but we recognize that we need to continue to learn to listen and communicate this, because, last year we found we weren't clear about the criteria of Chief. It was really buried deep in our website. It wasn't clear, and we weren't communicating this. So if you weren't aware we had a grant program and you didn't know about it, then you weren't able to apply. So for us, it has been a consistent focus on representation and inclusion, but also knowing we need to do better to be clear, communicate, and continue to learn and listen.
What would you say that the one thing that you hear from the women in your network that they love about Chief is? Like, what's the number one thing that they come back and tell you?
There is nothing more magical than hearing about that spark of a connection, of meeting somebody that has changed your life. And that could be somebody that is your new best friend and confidant, which I have met through Chief. I have met women who I have amazing best friends, but there is nothing like a friend who really gets it, who says, I know exactly what you're going through as an executive. Meeting people who have struck business deals that have, built out their agencies off the back of an incredible deal that they made at Chief for new business. The advice they've received, the job opportunities, that to me is the magic of Chief. It is meeting these incredible people and knowing that so much can come from the community, from these connections, these relationships that you may and likely would not have found anywhere else.
What do you feel about sort of the criticism that you all get around political issues like Roe v. Wade and being more of not just an advocate for women, but an advocate for women's rights and progressing things politically around the world? That's a hard place to be.
It is. And so we are very committed to making sure we can pave a path for women to get to the C-suite. So when it comes to political ideology, we do align ourselves with what would advance women. And that's very important to us in the core of what we do. I would say probably in action, that means we do make donations. We do make sure that we're communicating with our members. But the way we show up best is by giving the support to our members. So they are also grappling with the question of what happens in an election year? How do I manage my team? How do I manage my brand? And how do I approach politics? And so that's the bigger role we play, which is being a resource for them as executives. While we ourselves, and while I try also as an executive, sometimes there is not a right answer. It, to me, goes back to the core values of what you stand for as a company. Again, very aligned with our mission of making sure that women can maximize their leadership impact and pave the way for others. So there are some real political issues that fall into that wheelhouse that we feel extremely comfortable being vocal about. But again, I think providing the resources, providing the learning and community for executives who maybe don't have such a clear-cut value system that aligns with some of these political issues, because they're facing those challenges as well in their office today.
Do you feel that the biggest struggle that you hear from the women in the network is sort of the struggle of being lonely and not having others in their organization to relate to? Or is there a bigger struggle that they have?
I think loneliness is an undercurrent. I think humanity is in a loneliness epidemic. And so I do think executive women have their own flavor of loneliness. I would say day to day, the challenges our members are facing are challenges all executives are facing. Right? It is volatility, it is economic uncertainty, it is new technology and innovation, AI. Those are universal challenges. But again, those challenges if you are underrepresented in the boardroom, they are magnified by that, right? You may not have the ability to speak up in a room with all men in a way that aligns with what you believe and how you can overcome that challenge. So the challenges aren't different. It's the fact that you bring your identity to the table in how you are encountering that challenge that I think is different and unique to chief members.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so true. I told the story on another podcast, but I remember my first dinner as being a C-level executive, and it was me and all men, and we were having this lovely dinner on this roof in the middle of Hollywood. It was great. And the men were debating and talking, and I kept trying to chime in and I couldn't, I was trying and they just weren't hearing me. And I think I did it like 4 or 5 times. And then I just gave up and drank my wine. And then, I remember getting in the car and crying, but I was crying because I felt like I failed, as an executive to all the women that were looking to me to like be strong in that room and get my voice heard. And I didn't. And I felt like I let everybody down, and I cried in the Uber all the way home.
No,
I know. And that's sad. But I learned from that because I was like, after I was like, okay, no, I'm going to be heard, next time. But in that moment, I so wish I would have had a network like this, because I would have called my chief bestie.
Well, you also, if you are only in rooms with men and you feel like an only, it starts to become you, right? And so when you are in a room with other women and you feel like, you are surrounded by your people and you are comfortable in speaking and engaging, you start working that muscle in a different way. So it's so important for you to be in different environments because it's strengthening for you. If you are only ever used to being the only, it doesn't allow you to grow and to share that experience and to, again, like strengthen that muscle that says, no, I'm going to interrupt and speak out.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem with that muscle myself. I have always been an interrupter. My co-founder has told me before, she's like, you really approached your career like a white guy, which I don't know is insulting.
No, but I think that's what you do. Like you become, you look at how these other people get promoted and what they do, and you're like, okay, I'll just do that too. Like,
I guess I can interrupt people and be a bit of a blowhard. I'm okay with that.
But I love that. But you know what? I can too. But in that moment, I couldn't. I don't know why. I tried. And for whatever reason, they didn't hear me like 4 or 5 times. And then I gave up. I was like, fuck it.
Well, if that boardroom table doesn't change and it remains 90% men and we've got room for one woman, it's why we need to band together and be strong and make sure that we are hiring one another, being thoughtful about paving the way. So it's not just us using sharp angles and making our way up so we have one seat at the table.
Right.
We want to build a bigger table so that you are comfortable in a room and you don't feel like you are othered.
I know there's been a lot of focus and, even regulatory pressure to add more women to the boardroom. I haven't seen a big shift. I know there's some more. Do you have any perspective or numbers on that or data from just Chief that you're seeing a shift in the makeup of that room?
I know that there was a law in California and it got rolled back.
Yeah.
I know in economic hard times, DEI is being rolled back. And we are not seeing as big of a leap as we want. And I think that, again, in tough times, people go back to what they know. They often want to bring in, the white-haired man to come in and help feel calm that we're taking less of a chance right now, right? We need to just kind of steady the ship. And so I encourage companies in these times, this is when you need disruption. This is when you actually need to innovate. It is when things feel stifled. It is when you feel like, the economy is tough on our companies. This is when you actually need to take the leap and be innovative and take a chance and make sure that you have different voices in the room.
It's so true, but you're so right. When things get hard, people go to what's comfortable and what's easy and
safe.
Yeah,
it's
what's safe. Yeah.
And it's interesting. There's been studies around leadership. If you ask a man or a woman to draw a picture of a leader, they both more likely draw a man.
No, yeah, I'm sure that's true.
right? This is not just men preferring men. All leaders think about a leader as a man. So this is not just something that the men are doing to women. This is changing the mindset of all of us, of society, to think differently about what it is to be a leader and how do we redefine a new era of leadership.
Yeah. Do you think it's true with millennials? Like, women and men millennials would draw the same picture? Or do you think they see it differently?
Ooh, I am not sure about millennials. As an elder millennial myself, I have hope for Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I think the study is a few years old. It was in the New York Times. I want to say Gen Z, I believe, would draw something different.
Okay. I think you might be right.
I have a lot of hope in Gen Z.
And I have a lot of hope in Gen Z as well. I mean, there's a lot I think I need to learn from Gen Z. But what's your biggest hope with Gen Z?
So I think it's interesting. We think about generations as being so different from one another, when in fact, all of those stereotypes do not prove out. Like, we are very much just humans are humans, and we grew up with different technology and different economies, but human beings are human beings. We're not that different. I love the young kids because I love learning. I love intergenerational relationships. So I am a fan of befriending people who are, decades older than me, as well as decades younger than me. I think there's a lot to learn. And very often when people approach mentorship, they think it's a one-way street, right? I'm older. I will give you my wisdom and impart knowledge. I love Gen Zers because, yes, I need to know the fashion trends, but I want to know what's on their mind. How are they thinking about work? And I think Gen Z in particular are coming of age in the workforce during and post-pandemic. And it has been a very big shift in how they are showing up to the office, if they're showing up to the office at all. The way that they are learning, right, those office norms and building relationships, it's changing. So they're still building relationships. They're still learning how to show up, but in a way that is often Zoom first. And so I find that dynamic fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot that I can learn from Gen Z, just as much as I can teach them, what the elder millennials are doing these days.
Yeah, like we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways.
In high heels in Helsinki.
I did.
You did walk up a hill both ways.
I did.
In stilettos in Helsinki.
I know. I don't know what I was thinking.
To be fair, the conference was called Slush.
I know.
And neither of us were prepared for Slush.
I was not. I should have really paid more attention to the title of the conference.
I was wearing very ugly boots. I was prepared. Well, one of my favorite parts of when we were at this conference is it was, there's a lot of men at this conference. It's a tech conference, a startup tech conference in Europe. And there was an after party. And you and I and a few other women found a couch and a table. And anytime a woman by herself walked by, we'd be like, hey, and we'd bring her to us. And we created this giant girl gang that I think at one point I felt like we were just like running the party.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we were. But, we did a little mini chief right in there. We did. It
felt like a mini chief.
Yeah.
And I encourage women, if you are at a conference, if you feel like, I don't know anybody. It's a terrible feeling when you show up and you don't know anybody else in the room. Go find somebody else and start a girl group.
Yeah, no, I think
it is good times.
I still get like when I go to like these big conferences and I'm speaking or something, I still get intimidated. I'm like, oh gosh, like I don't know any of these people.
It's why we find each other.
Yeah, but I found you. And I got so lucky to have met you.
We made it. We found each other. And it's why Chief is so important for building these relationships, because we don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to be in Helsinki every month. And it is important for women like us to find one another, find that camaraderie. And I got advice from you real time. I was on a work call about an HR issue and I chatted with you about it in real time.
You did.
And it was exactly what I needed.
Yes. Those darn HR issues, I tell you what.
Whack-a-mole.
Okay, here we go for career confession. So I'm going to read it off, Lindsay, and then I'll ask for your perspective. For the past few years, I've been a senior HR manager in a growing startup. I report directly to the CEO, and always flagged any issues I thought needed to be addressed in the company to him. I've always felt like he listened, but nothing really ever changed. About 2 months ago, we hired an additional senior manager, and already our CEO is making changes based on his suggestions. Am I reading too much into it that I'm not being taken seriously as a woman? Lindsay, what do you think?
Maybe. And here's the advice I would give. First, I would say many startup CEOs have a shiny newness bias, right? This person just started. They have a brand new perspective. They might have come from a company that your CEO really respects. So there is a little bit of that recency bias that I always see with startup founders.
It's so true. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's so true.
Right? People love shiny things.
Mm-hmm.
The second is it might be how this person is communicating. So often as you are working with a startup founder, there is a comfort of just sharing your thoughts, sharing your opinions, and you might need to document them and get a little bit more formal now that you have a colleague at an equal stature with you. You might feel like you have flagged those issues, but it may not have been in a way that was formal with a problem solution. So I would say to make sure you are kind of going toe-to-toe in the delivery. And if your suggestions are still not being taken seriously, you might have a problem on your hand that you are not being taken seriously as a woman. But I would suggest and advise doing that first to make it feel like you're on equal footing. And that familiarity he feels with you, your startup CEO, isn't one of the issues that's actually causing your undercurrent of doubt.
I think your answer was perfect and right on. I think you're so right about the recency bias. I think all people, but especially startup founders, they really love the new shiny object. However, the dynamic and the pattern that you've built with the CEO, and as Lindsay was saying, the comfortableness that you have with each other may be playing a part in his not making changes based on what you're saying. So I do think it is good advice from Lindsay to get more formal, follow up with an email after you have a conversation with them to say, hey, I know we talked about these 3 things. Here's what we should do. Let me know how I can be helpful. Or, keeping track in like a document for your one-on-ones, right? So keep track of all the things that you talk about and you sort of list, here's, the week before. And you can go back to that list and say, hey, remember when we talked about X, Y, and Z? I never saw anything happen with that. But I do think it's fair for Lindsay to point out that there is a recency bias, and maybe the two of you are just so comfortable in your communication, you need to shake it up a little bit and be able to be on even footing with this new person. So I think that's good advice. And then, if the problem persists, then you may have a problem, and then you'll have to figure out how you want to handle that.
Yeah. And as Jess said, you are the HR expert, but my advice always for any HR question is documentation across the board. You are never going to lose anything by documenting your own issues, making sure that you are logging dates, times, what you see happening for yourself, but also documenting for your CEO, your ideas. So you might have to do that in a way that is less comfortable and a step change, knowing that if it is a growing startup, you might need to get more formal in the way you're approaching it.
I think that's absolutely right. Great advice and great question.
Great question. I want to follow up in 2 months.
I know, me too. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I so loved our conversation. I'm so grateful that I got to meet you in a very cold Helsinki. You're a delight.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Thanks for listening to Truth Works. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.